Have you ever thought that nothing about modern life actually makes sense? We've just lived inside it long enough that it feels normal. Most people don't actually feel good about their lives. They feel busy. They feel tired. They feel vaguely anxious. And they assume that that's just what adulthood feels like. But if you zoom out even slightly, this whole thing is absurd. We've built a world where humans spend most of their waking hours optimizing things, symbols, metrics, schedules, and systems that barely resemble real life anymore. And then we act surprised when people feel disconnected, burned out, and numb. The problem isn't that people are lazy, and it's not that people are broken. The problem is that modern life is fundamentally misaligned with how we actually function. And once you see that clearly, it's very hard to unsee it. When I say modern life is abstract, I'm not being philosophical for the sake of it. What I mean is actually something very specific. An abstraction is simply just a representation of something real, but it's not the real thing itself. For example, money is not food, shelter, or security. It's a symbol that represents access to these things. A job is not value creation. It's a role inside of a system that claims to produce value. And a KPI is not progress. It's simply a number that's meant to approximate progress of some sort. A calendar is not time. It's a grid that we impose on reality to manage behavior. Abstractions are useful. They're powerful. The problem is not the abstraction itself. The problem is that we've now built a world where most people never interact with the underlying reality at all. They interact almost exclusively with symbols that point to symbols that point to symbols. Numbers about performance, emails about work, meetings about alignment, dashboards about outcomes. At some point, the abstraction stopped being a tool and it became everything. And when you live your life entirely inside abstractions, it becomes very difficult to tell if anything that you're doing actually matters. And this is really where modern productivity culture enters into the picture. Productivity, in theory, is about doing meaningful work efficiently. And that's fine. But in practice, increasingly it's become about appearing optimized inside of an abstract system. Morning routines, productivity apps, task managers, second brain systems, AI assistants, workflow tools, optimization hacks, biohacking, metrics for the sake of metrics. People spend enormous amounts of time optimizing their work without actually asking the question of if the work is worth doing in the first place. Productivity becomes this form of psychological relief. It provides dopamine without direction. And you feel like you're doing something important because you're busy, organized, and exhausted. But busyness is not progress. And optimization is not purpose. In a world dominated by abstractions, productivity becomes a socially acceptable way to avoid asking the harder questions. And this is where the damage really happens, because all of this gets normalized. So chronic stress is now normal. Poor sleep is now normal. Low energy is now normal. Anxiety is now rampant. And dissatisfaction with your life is now commonplace. And people don't ask whether their lives are good or whether they're bad. They just ask if they're normal. And normal simply means statistically common. It does not mean healthy. And it certainly doesn't mean optimal. And it doesn't mean intentional. Normal health, for example, is not just mediocre. It's objectively bad. Large portions of the population today are metabolically unhealthy, physically inactive, chronically inflamed, underslept, overstimulated, and mentally fried. A lot of people have fragile finances. Most people are one shock away from complete financial panic. Normal careers are constrained, high effort, limited autonomy, and capped upside. And normal relationships are neglected because of all of this. Normal lives, as a result, are quietly unsatisfying. And because everyone around you is in the same condition, all of this stops even looking like a problem. It just looks like life. None of this is surprising when you understand the mismatch that's at play here. Humans evolved to solve tangible problems in physical reality. We evolved from movement, feedback, and direct cause and effect. We did not evolve for constant alerts, artificial schedules, abstract status hierarchies, or symbolic productivity systems. That's now the environment that we live in. We've placed human nervous systems into a world of screens, metrics, and incentives that rarely align with what actually matters. And then we wonder why people feel anxious, disconnected, and exhausted, despite living more comfortable than ever before in history. And this issue isn't individual weakness, it's systemic mismatch. If you zoom out far enough, honestly, it's hard not to laugh at all of this and how ridiculous it really is. We're literally temporary biological organisms on a fucking spinning rock, burning through our limited time, optimizing abstract systems that we invented and wondering why it all feels empty. You see, when everything is abstract, it becomes very difficult to define real progress. So people default to what's visible and measurable. More money, more credentials, more job titles, more busyness, more status. And they mistake movement within a system for movement toward a life that they actually want. Years pass, effort is expended, energy is burned, and yet very little changes. And this is how people end up feeling trapped without really knowing exactly what the fuck happened. It's not because they failed, it's because they were optimizing the wrong things the entire time. This isn't an argument against modern life, it's simply an argument for seeing things clearly. Once you realize that much of your life is spent optimizing abstractions, your priorities begin to shift naturally. You start asking the important questions. Does this actually matter? Is this real progress or just motion and busyness? Am I solving a real problem here or just feeding a system? You don't need a dramatic escape, you don't need a manifesto. Clarity does the work for you. Because when nothing about modern life makes sense anymore, that's usually a point where people start thinking for themselves. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. I drop one like this every 48 hours and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks.